Imagine waking up one morning to discover that half your country doesn't think you're even part of the same nation. What if I told you that for centuries, a fierce people in Japan's northern frontier refused to bow to the might of the imperial court? You've probably heard about samurai and shoguns, but never about the emishi who lived in the wild mountains and dense forests where the wind howls like a pack of wolves. These were the Emishi Wars, and they reshaped Japan in ways you never learned in school. Okay, picture this. You're standing at the edge of a dark pine forest, your breath hanging in the air like ghost smoke. Below you, a valley stretching out where villages huddle by the river like scattered pearls. Now imagine armies riding out from the imperial capital, marching into the unknown. That's where our story begins, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around. So why should you care about a bunch of battles that happened over 1,200 years ago? Well, for starters, these wars were the crucible that forged the early Japanese state. Without them, the map of Japan might look very different today. Plus, the Emishi weren't cartoon barbarians. They were skilled horsemen, fierce warriors, and shrewd diplomats. Their culture left traces in modern Japan, hidden in plain sight. Let's dive into it. First, let's meet the Emishi. They weren't a single tribe, but a collection of clans living along the Tohoku region. They spoke a different language, had their own customs, and refused to farm rice. Instead, they hunted deer, fished in the rivers, and raised horses. You know those decorative horse motifs in old Japanese art? You can thank the Emishi for that. Now, flash to the early 8th century. The Nara court in Kyoto is flush with power, feeling unstoppable. They've built giant temples, written massive histories, and centralized taxes. They look at the north and see untapped land. They want more rice paddies, more resources, more people to pay taxes. And in 715, they send a small expedition. Guess what happens? Total disaster. The Emishi ambush them in a narrow mountain pass, arrows darkening the sky like a locust swarm. The invaders flee back to the south with their tails between their legs. Now here's where it gets interesting. Instead of giving up, the court sends envoy after envoy, offering treaties, trade deals, even bribes to bribery. Some Emishi chieftains see the benefit. They send their daughters to marry Japanese nobles. They adopt Japanese ritual. They even learn to sign their names with Chinese characters. But under the surface, their hearts stay wild. Fast forward to the year 781. Emperor Kanmu takes the throne. He's looking to establish his legacy and decides to crush the Emishi once and for all. He appoints a general, Sakanoe no Tamuramaro, a guy said to ride a white horse so tall his helmet bristles like antlers. Some stories say he learned the Emishi's guerrilla tactics and turned them around. Other tales claim he was more ambush than cavalry charging head-on into enemy lines. Here's a gut punch moment. Imagine you're an Emishi warrior standing chest-deep in river water, waiting for cavalry to thunder through. You see horses rearing, arrows flying, your heart's pounding. Then, suddenly, it stops. Nobody's there. The river runs red, and the attackers vanished into the mist. That was Tamaramaro's specialty: strike hard, vanish harder. But battles aren't won by ambushes alone. The court built fortified camps called sei that dotted the frontier. They stationed soldiers in log palisades, pressed local tribes for supplies, and used signals of smoke by day and fire by night to communicate. This frontier grid slowly squeezed the Emishi into the mountains. Want a jaw-dropper? Some Emishi clans actually switched sides, joining the court as keimochi, literally guests of the emperor. They brought their horses, their hunting skills, and helped lead campaigns against their former allies. Talk about awkward family reunions, right? By 802, most of the organized resistance is crushed. The court proclaims victory, but in the shadows, new rebellions flare up. The biggest one, led by a chieftain named Atarui. He rallies 30,000 horsemen and foot soldiers. In the Battle of Suma, the imperial army suffers its worst defeat, thousands slain. The court panics. They haven't suffered a hit like this since the Jinshin War, nearly 2 centuries earlier. Now, here's a cliffhanger. The court sends Tamuramaro back with reinforcements. He corners Atarui's forces near the Kitakami River. The Emishi fight like cornered wolves, but eventually they collapse. Atarui and his lieutenant Moore lead what's left of their band into a last stand. When they realize they've lost, Atarui surrenders, a shock nobody saw coming. The court parades him in chains through Kyoto. Thousands cheer. Then, dark twist, they execute him in front of the imperial palace. Brutal reminder of power. You might think that's the end of the story, but culture is a river, not a dam. Even after the wars, the Emishi spirit persisted. Their horse culture seeped into Japanese cavalry tactics. Their flute songs influenced court music. Some Emishi clans transformed into samurai lineages, serving the Fujiwara and Minamoto clans generations later. Pause for a second, imagining that. The proud warriors who once fought off emperors now riding alongside them centuries later. It's wild. Stick around, because here's another twist. The Emishi language left riddles that scholars still puzzle over. Place names in Tohoku hint at lost words: Kesen, Esashi, and Kitakami. Each holds echoes of a language wiped off official records. Archaeologists unearth pottery with Emishi motifs deep in valleys where the wind still sings through bamboo. Now let's zoom out, bigger picture. What do these wars teach us? They show that the edges of empires are never neat. Power isn't just about armies, it's about alliances, trade, and culture. The Nara and Heian courts learned that brute force alone wasn't enough. They brought in frontier governors, they built roads, planted rice, and absorbed Emishi customs. They adapted. You ever think about how culture works today, how ideas spread, how borders blur? The Emishi Wars are an ancient case study of that same story. The North was once the other, but over centuries became part of Japan's heartland. Before we wrap, you need to know one final eerie detail. Legend says on quiet nights you can hear Emishi drumbeats echoing in the foothills. Some locals swear they see phantom riders in the mist. Whether you believe that or chalk it up to moonlight playing tricks, it shows how stories live on beyond textbooks. So what's the takeaway? Maybe that the most forgotten chapters of history shine the brightest when you dig them up. That borders aren't lines on a map but stories of people. That victory and defeat are two sides of the same coin, and both have power to shape who we become. If there's one mind-blowing moment to carry forward, it's this. The Emishi weren't just victims of conquest. They were survivors, shapeshifters who left their mark on everything from war tactics to music to the very names of towns. Their story reminds us history is alive, messy and full of surprises. Thanks for hanging out on this journey to Japan's forgotten north. If you enjoyed wandering through those misty forests and charging into ancient battles, give this video a like. Want more deep dives like this? Drop a comment below and let me know what frontier you want us to explore next. And hit subscribe so you don't miss our next escapade into history's hidden corners. Alright, that's it for today. I'll catch you in the next one. Safe travels through time. What if the most powerful man in the land decided he didn't need the throne at all? Picture the streets of Nara in springtime, cherry blossoms drifting like soft pink snow until steel clashes and blood writes a new chapter in history. That was Japan in 764 AD when Fujiwara no Nakamaro, the ultimate insider, turned rebel. You won't believe how a once trusted regent nearly toppled an emperor, and how one monk changed the game forever. Okay, so here's the deal. We're diving into the Fujiwara no Nakamaro rebellion, a story of ambition, betrayal, and monk-fueled politics that reads like a samurai soap opera. By the end, you'll see how this one failed coup reshaped imperial power and set the stage for the rise of a monk who literally shook the throne. Let's go. Can you imagine growing up shadowed by emperors, your family's name practically etched in the palace walls? That was Nakamaro. Born into the mighty Fujiwara clan, he watched his uncles and cousins clutch regency after regency, turning cherrywood screens into golden offices. By his 20s, he'd mastered court etiquette, Confucian classics, and the art of smiling while stabbing someone in the back. But isn't that always the way? Power invites more power trips. Nakamaro's big break came when he was appointed Taiho, the Grand Guardian, charged with protecting the young Emperor Junin. He stacked the court with his allies, controlling promotions, tax reforms, even temple appointments. Imagine puppeteering an empire from behind silk curtains. Every nod, every decree, every rumor meant Nakamaro's voice. And yet power that's sweet always sours, especially when others taste it too. Enter Empress Koken. Picture a court where retired emperors still pull strings. Koken had abdicated in 749 but remained dangerously ambitious. She loved art, Buddhism, and political intrigue, Some say she kept Neru, her beloved elephant, on the palace grounds just to show who was boss. When she decided to return to the throne, Nakamaro put on his best bow and said, "Sure, your majesty, whatever you say." But inside, his claws were out. Meanwhile, there was Dokyo, the monk. Imagine someone so charismatic that an empress can't help but gift him everything: lands, titles, even her ear for policy. Dokyo preached peace and prosperity, but what he really preached was loyalty to Koken. Nakamaro saw this and felt his power drain. His carefully constructed court faction began to wobble like a poorly built pagoda in an earthquake.
Ever wonder how a rebellion starts? It always begins with a whisper, a letter, a secret meeting by candlelight. Nakamaro convened his allies, governors, military commanders, even some priests who resented Dokyo's influence. They met in dim corridors, plotting to seize the emperor and gut the empress's authority. The plan was simple: kidnap the retired empress, execute her monk favorite, install Junin as a puppet, and call it state business. But history shows that simple plans usually end ugly. Before things got too heated, let's take a quick pause. If you're geeking out over palace intrigue and power plays, hit that like button so I know to keep digging into this wild stuff. Alright, back to the drama. Spring 764 arrived, and the cherry blossoms fooled everyone into calm. Then came the signal. Nakamaro's men surrounded the imperial palace, swords glinting in dawn light. The emperor was safely tucked away, prepped to issue fake edicts, declaring Nakamaro protector of the realm. But Koken had spies, and Dokyo whispered warnings in her ear. So when the troops advanced, they found deserted halls and shifting walls of resistance. Nara's streets echoed with clashing arms. Nakamaro's cavalry charged through gates as citizens scattered for cover. The smell of incense mingled with cordite, or what passed for gunpowder back then. Temples that once rang with chants now trembled under marching boots. People whispered, "Didn't we just celebrate the cherry blossoms yesterday?" Then the tide turned. Loyalist forces, led by the Empress's generals, ambushed Nakamaro's troops near Mount Miwa. The rebel army, caught in a pincer, collapsed like a sandcastle at high tide. Nakamaro himself fought bravely. Legend says he cut through 3 guards before being unhorsed, but even his skill couldn't save a doomed cause. By dusk, the rebellion lay in ruins. It gets better. Nakamaro was captured, bound, Tagihan, and taken back to the palace grounds, where Koken waited. Rumour has it she watched the procession from a veranda, cherry petals drifting around her like confetti. Some accounts say she offered Nakamaro a last drink of wine before the executioner's blade fell. Brutal. But hey, this is 7th century politics. In the aftermath, Dokyo's star rose. Koken showered him with titles, clamouring to make him crown prince. Or worse. Historians debate. Was she madly in love, or simply saw in him a loyal ally who'd never try a rebellion? Regardless, Dokyo moved into the inner sanctum and wielded power that would have made Nakamaro blush.
But let's not gloss over the human cost. Families of rebels were exiled, estates confiscated, entire villages forced to kneel in public penance. Fujiwara no Nakamaro's children lost their status. Some say they changed their names to avoid persecution. The rebellion left scars in Nara that took decades to heal. Quick check-in. If you ever thought history was just dust and dates, this is your wake-up call. Human ambition, raw emotion, betrayal, it's all here, played out on a stage of lacquered wood and silk. And this is just one rebellion. Think how many more are buried in old scrolls. There's an even darker twist. The Buddhist establishment, once torn between supporting the throne or the rebel Fujiwara, got its hands dirty too. Temples switched allegiances overnight, funding armies to protect their own interests. When the dust settled, many temples prospered under Dokyo's patronage, turning arsenals into doctrines. Monks who'd once preached detachment found themselves counting gold coins. Meanwhile, the Fujiwara clan learned a lesson. Family solidarity is good, but knowing when to play the long game is better. They retreated, regrouped, and by the Heian period, re-emerged stronger than ever, controlling the succession through strategic marriages. You could say Nakamaro's failure was the blueprint for Fujiwara longevity: lose battles to win the war. And what became of Emperor Junin? He was dethroned, banished to an island, and reportedly died in exile. Some say by starvation, others by assassination. His tomb is a shrine for the tragic, a reminder that the throne isn't always a seat of glory. It can be a trap. Let's pause for a moment and sip some tea, well, metaphorically. Imagine hearing the wind rustle through plum blossoms on the palace grounds, knowing violence erupted here. History isn't impersonal. It smells, tastes, and echoes under your feet. The Fujiwara no Nakamaro rebellion might have ended in failure, but its aftershocks changed Japan's political landscape. It weakened the absolute power of retired emperors, bolstered Buddhist involvement in state affairs, and taught the Fujiwara clan the art of patience. Without this clash, the Heian era might never have bloomed into its golden age of court poetry and calligraphy.
So what's the big takeaway? Power is a fickle master. Those who reach for it too quickly often burn their hands, but those who learn from their mistakes, adapt and wait, can shape history for centuries. Fujiwara no Nakamaro shows us the perils of overreach and the resilience of a clan willing to learn and evolve. Ready for a final mindbender? Some scholars suggest that without Nakamaro's revolt, Dokyo might never have gained enough influence, and Buddhism's grip on politics would have been weaker. Imagine Japan without that monk running the show. The course of medieval Japanese religious and political history could have been entirely different. If you're still with me after swords and smoke and palace intrigue, drop a comment below with your favourite power grab from history. And hey, if you want more stories of emperors and assassins, monks and mavericks, hit subscribe and ring that bell. I've got you covered. Thanks for hanging out in Nara with me today. Next time you see cherry blossoms, remember, they're more than just pretty petals. They once floated down onto a battlefield where lives and legacies were lost and won. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and remember that history isn't dead, it's alive, breathing in the tales we tell.
Imagine standing on a windswept hill in Western Japan, imagining an entire kingdom lost to time. What if I told you this kingdom once rivaled the power of the early Yamato rulers, boasting giant burial mounds and a culture so rich that its echoes still shape Japan today? Welcome to the kingdom of Kibi. You've probably heard of Yamato when you think of ancient Japan, but have you ever wondered about the power lurking just beyond its borders? Picture an expansive land stretching from the Seto Inland Sea up to the Chugoku Mountains, a land where bronze bells chimed in ceremony, where warriors rode magnificent horses, and where the dead were laid to rest in tombs big enough to swallow small villages. That's Kibi, and until recently most textbooks barely whispered its name. What does the Kingdom of Kibi tell us about the story of Japan's unification? Why have we forgotten it? And how can a handful of rusty artifacts and massive earthen mounds rewrite everything we thought we knew about Japan's earliest days? Let me take you on a journey across misty rice paddies, past ancient shrines, into underground burial chambers, and finally face to face with the ghosts of kings long gone. You'll hear about epic battles, political intrigue, cultural blossoming, and a shadow polity whose disappearance remains one of history's greatest mysteries. By the end of this, you'll never look at those grassy kofun the same way again. Close your eyes and imagine the first time a Yamato envoy approached Kibi's high table. Did they stride in with bowed heads or defiant snarls? We don't have a transcript, but the landscape speaks volumes. In the earliest days, around the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, Japan was a patchwork of small chiefdoms. One of those was Kibi, whose elite ships plied the inland sea, trading salt, rice, and iron tools far and wide. Unlike some inland clans, Kibi was a coastal power, its people skilled sailors enjoying contact with the Korean peninsula and even parts of China. You can almost taste the salt spray on your lips as you stand at the edge of Kasoka Bay and imagine merchant vessels laden with goods. But Kibi's true claim to fame lies hidden in plain sight. Drive through Okayama Prefecture, and you'll see dozens of rounded grassy hills rising improbably from flat farmlands. These are kofun, ancient burial mounds. The The biggest, the Tsukuriyama Kofun, stretches over 350 meters long. That's longer than 3 football fields end to end. Inside lies a wooden coffin, bronze mirrors, iron swords, and exquisite jewelry. Crafted more than 16 centuries ago, each mound marks a ruler, a dynasty, a chapter in Kibi's story. When did you last pause to ponder who lies beneath your local park hill?
Let's pause for a moment. I'm wondering, are you picturing these mounds yet? Good, because here's where it gets wild. Around the mid-6th century, the rising Yamato state started gobbling up territory. Through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and outright conquest, Yamato began to impose its power across the archipelago. Yet Kibi held out, longer and stronger than almost any other rival. Given the choice between bowing to far-flung Yamato nobles or riding into battle on your trusty steed draped in lamellar armor, what would you choose? Archaeologists point to grave goods, weapons decorated with gold leaf, imported Chinese coins, and mukauta helmets polished to a mirror shine. Imagine the clang of metal, the flash of a warrior's gaze, the smell of pine smoke drifting across the battlefield. Kibi's elite carved out a niche, and they did it with swagger. But fairly soon, those horses galloped under Yamato banners, and the massive kofuns ceased springing up like mushrooms after rain. Here's a question for you. When a kingdom disappears, does it vanish completely, or does it hide in plain sight under a different name? I think you'll agree Kibi never truly died. Its aristocracy intermarried with Yamato elites. Its rituals filtered into the imperial court. Kibitsu Shrine still stands, its vermilion gates bright against the forest canopy, dedicated to Kibi's tutelary deity. Every shrine festival, every local legend about a cunning Kibi lord, these are living traces of a vanished realm. Let's rewind to one of the kingdom's greatest moments. Around 463 AD, records from the Chinese Liang dynasty mention a king of Gaia sending envoys to the continent. Wait, that's Korea. But the same routes that carried Gaia envoys probably ferried Kibi traders too. Maritime trade networks were buzzing. Imagine lacquered wooden boats creaking as they moved under the moonlight, cargo holds stuffed with rice, hemp cloth, and precious metalwork. The sea was Kibi's lifeline to the wider world. Picture now a grand ceremony atop one of those kofun. Smoke rises from incense burners, silk-robed nobles sip rice wine, bronze bells ring with every change of the guard. Tales are recited of ancient heroes crossing seas, of mountain spirits blessing the rice fields, of Kibi's first king laying down the law. That ceremony wasn't a minor affair. It was Kibi's way of showing the world, we matter. Let me break for a second. I bet you're picturing that ceremony and thinking, I wish I could have snapped a photo. Me too. But the beauty of history is that we can reconstruct that moment in our minds. And every time we do, we honor those forgotten voices. One of Kibi's most intriguing legends concerns a horse. At Kibitsu Shrine, they still hold an annual ritual where they lead a mare barefoot through torii gates. According to mythology, this mare once alerted villagers to an impending flood, saving countless lives. Are we looking at a folk memory or a ritual handed down straight from Kibi's heyday? Either way, it's a testament to the power of storytelling. But even the greatest kingdoms face internal challenges. Family feuds splintered the nobility. New religions like Buddhism arrived from the continent, promising salvation and doctrine galore. Some chiefs embraced the new faith, building wooden temples. Others clung to Shinto rites, offering rice cakes to kami. This religious tug-of-war rippled through Kibi society like tremors before an earthquake. And eventually those tremors cracked the kingdom's unity. Let's zoom in on one story that sums it all up. Legend speaks of a prince, let's call him Prince Kibiko, who fell in love with a commoner girl. His parents forbade the match. She died of heartbreak, he renounced his title, and some say he wandered to Yamato, leaving Kibi's throne to a more ruthless cousin. Whether true or purely myth, that story captures the tension between personal passion and political duty. It reminds us that kings bleed too. Time for a mid-video checklist. How are you holding up? Feeling immersed? Good. We're past the halfway point. But the real kicker is yet to come. By the late 6th century, Yamato's imperial court had adopted Buddhism as a state religion. Pagodas sprouted, monks chanted sutras in elaborate gowns, and embassies to Sui and Tang China brought back new philosophies. Kibi's old guard watched all this with wary eyes. Their ancestors had built great burial mounds. Now the country was building stone pagodas.
Some embraced the change, others plotted rebellion. Bitter rivalries flared. Around 587 AD, the Nihon Shoki records a massive suppression of a rebellion in Izumo, not far from Kibi. Who knows how many Kibi clans got caught in the dragnet? Rebels were executed, nobles stripped of titles, their kofun desecrated. Suddenly those grassy mounds were not symbols of pride but reminders of past insubordination. Overnight, laying claim to Kibi's legacy became dangerous. Silence became self-preservation. Here's a cliffhanger moment. You ever wonder what it would be like to walk into a forbidden archive? Imagine finding a leather-bound scroll wrapped in hemp, written in elegant cursive. You pry it open. The ink's faded, but you make out names of kings unknown to Yamato chronicles. You realize you're holding proof that Kibi once had its own alphabet or script. That discovery would rewrite everything, right? Sadly, no such archive has emerged, yet. The possibility sits out there, waiting like buried treasure.
I'll pause for dramatic effect. Take a breath. Let the suspense settle in. Let's talk art. Kibi artisans worked in hammered bronze, mirrors polished until they reflected clouds, shields embossed with swirling dragon motifs, horse trappings painted with cinnabar. In some kofun excavations, shards of Chinese Celadon ceramics were found, evidence of trade links stretching thousands of miles. You can almost hear the workshop hammers and smell the incense in the kilns. Today, museums in Okayama display these relics behind glass cases. But imagine holding one, feeling its cool weight, tracing the fine etched lines with your fingertip. Now here's a question to chew on. When we talk about Japanese culture, are we really summing up a single stream, or is it more like braided rivers? Kibi gave one strand, its maritime networks, its tomb construction techniques, its unique rituals. Yamato added another strand, imperial court ceremony, continental philosophy, centralized bureaucracy. Together they braided into what we call ancient Japan. Ignoring Kibi is like appreciating a tapestry, but erasing half the threads. Toward the end of the 7th century, things changed fast. The Taika reforms of 645 AD sought to centralize power completely in the imperial court. Land was nationalized, local chiefs lost their fiefs, and a Chinese-style Ritsuryo code was imposed. In this new order, there was no room for autonomous kingdoms. Kibi's rulers, if they still held any autonomy, were absorbed into provincial governorships. Their kofun buildings stopped, their unique council assemblies vanished. In just a generation or two, Kibi as an independent polity was gone. Poof. Yet here's the paradox. Kibi's disappearance made it more fascinating. Today we study Kibi not because it lasted long, but because it glimpsed a Japan that might have been different. A Japan where multiple regional powers balanced one another. A Japan richer in local traditions. A Japan not entirely molded by an imperial center. When I walk through Okayama and see those ancient mounds, I see the road not taken. Before we wrap up, let me ask, what if Kibi had prevailed? What if it had formed alliances with other coastal polities, or even established seagoing empires of its own? How different would Korea, China, or even maritime Southeast Asia's trade routes look? History might have unfolded along an entirely different axis. Wild to think about, right? So what's the takeaway? History isn't just about who wins. Sometimes the real winners are the stories that survive. And Kibi's story is breathing under layers of earth and grass, waiting for us to dig in. By piecing together ceramics, chronicles, and legends, we resurrect voices long silent. We learn about power, culture, identity, and ultimately about ourselves. Because Kibi reminds us that today's world was never inevitable. It was shaped by choices, alliances, conflicts, and yes, by kingdoms that slipped into shadows.
If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Japan's shadow polity, consider letting me know with a like or a comment on which part amazed you most. Maybe you're itching to visit those kofun yourself or dig deeper into local legends in your own backyard. Either way, thanks for joining me on this journey, and if you're new here, hit subscribe for more stories from the hidden corners of history. Next time you drive past a grassy mound or hear an old folk tale, remember Kibi, because sometimes the best history lessons come from the places we least expect.
What if a single night under lantern light, a secret blade sliced through the heart of power and set an empire on a course nobody saw coming? Imagine palace guards frozen in shock, inked scrolls left unread, and one act of betrayal rewriting history's playbook forever. Ready to crack open the story that turned Japan upside down? Imagine the corridors of an ancient imperial palace in 645 CE. Lanterns flicker against polished wood. The air carries the scent of incense and tension. Outside, courtiers whisper about Soga no Iruka, the powerful aristocrat whose grip on the throne seems unbreakable. Yet lurking in the wings are a prince with a chip on his shoulder and a fearless ally plotting to upend centuries of tradition. Today's journey isn't just about swords and palace intrigue. It's about power and ideas, about how one night of violence unleashed a wave of reforms so sweeping they remade land, law, and even the concept of citizenship. Stick around, because by the end you'll see the roots of modern Japan planted in that moonlit act of defiance, and you might never look at government the same way again. Close your eyes and feel the chill of early spring slipping through shoji screens. In the Horyuji temple, incense coils drift like ghosts. The Yamato court is alive with the clash of clans. On one side stands the Soga family, champions of Buddhism and opening Japan to foreign ideas. On the other lurk conservative forces fearful of change. Imagine being a young aristocrat caught between devotion to the emperor and loyalty to your clan. Every glance could be a threat, every word a trap. Have you ever wondered what makes a powerful family believe they can rewrite history? The Soga clan didn't just influence the emperor, they practically were the emperor's power behind the throne. Generations of strategic marriages cemented their place. They built extravagant temples, lavish estates, and welcomed Chinese codices that promised the secrets of centralized rule. To them, modernization was destiny. But when a single branch of power grows too large, it becomes its own rival. Enter Prince Naka no Oe, grandson of that iconic regent Prince Shotoku. He watched the Soga tighten their grip, sidelining his own branch of the imperial family. Imagine the frustration, knowing your birthright slipping away, while the Soga lord Soga no Iruka strolled palace halls with near-imperial arrogance. You'd want to act too, wouldn't you? But lopping off an entire family requires both nerve and an ally with equal fire in their belly. Cue Fujiwara no Kamatari, samurai, ritual attendant, and secret conspirator. He'd seen how the Soga's power eclipsed even the emperor's. Their corruption bled the treasury. Their favoritism enraged loyal clans. Kamatari made a fateful pact with Prince Naka no Oe. Their plan? An assassination that would shake the court to its core and justify a sweeping reform. Picture the night of July 10, 645. The palace is hushed, cloaked in darkness. Torches line the corridors, their glow dancing off lacquered beams. Iruka presides over an audience, oblivious to the storm gathering just outside. Suddenly, masked figures burst in. Steel flashes, a scream. Blood stains the tatami mats. In seconds, Soga no Iruka lies dead. The conspirators make their escape. The palace erupts in chaos. Shouts echo, guards scramble. An aristocratic bloodline is ended in a heartbeat. Now imagine the aftermath. The emperor, stunned by the treachery, finds himself both vulnerable and liberated. With the Soga chief gone, Prince Naka no Oe steps forward. He announces a purge of corrupt officials and claims a divine mandate to restore the throne's dignity. It's a masterstroke of political theatre. The bloodshed legitimizes his power grab. But assassinating a tyrant is only the first act. The real drama unfolds in the weeks that follow. With the court under new leadership, Naka no Oe and Kamatari draft the Edicts of Taika. They call for land to be nationalized, turning fields once held by powerful clans into state-managed farms. They decree that taxes be levied uniformly, filling the treasury for the first time. They mandate census-taking, registering every citizen under imperial authority. And perhaps most shockingly, they mirror Chinese administrative models, creating provinces, governors, and a bureaucracy answerable directly to the emperor. Pause for a moment. Do you feel the magnitude? Before Taika, power in Japan was a tangled web of clan loyalties. After Taika, authority flowed downward from a single source, the emperor. It was a revolution cloaked in legal language, a bloodless coup on paper, fueled by the violence of the Ishii incident. You can almost hear the collective gasp as samurai and peasants alike realized their lives now belonged, on paper at least, to a distant ruler. Time for a quick breather. Sip your tea.
Imagine yourself in a wooden hall as courtiers pore over inked scrolls, debating the nuances of tax brackets and land allotments. Some cheer the promise of stability, others grumble that they've lost ancestral lands. The tension between progress and tradition simmers beneath every brushstroke. Let's zoom in on the census. For the first time, officials tally names, ages, occupations, even household sizes. This wasn't just bookkeeping. It was a way to know every subject, to assign taxes, to call men to arms. Census data funneled into provincial offices, forging an invisible network of control. Ever wonder why medieval states struggled to raise armies? Without knowing who lived where, you can't conscript. Taika changed that. Suddenly, the Yamato court wielded information like a weapon.
Feel the weight of those scrolls in your hands. Columns of calligraphy stretching across rice paper, each character stamping a human life with a number. A single barcode in a pre-modern world. Bureaucracy can feel cold, but it shapes destinies. It builds roads, it funds temples, it ensures harvests. And it begins right here, in the aftermath of a palace bloodbath. But reforms breed resistance. Clans displaced by land redistribution resent their losses. Local magnates bristle at imperial inspectors. Samurai question whether a desk-bound official can command loyalty like a lord in the field. Imagine whisper networks warning of rebellion, secret alliances forging behind closed doors. How do you enforce a law in wood-built provinces when travel is slow and communication spotty? The court's answer: more paperwork and more envoys. Provincial governors ride dusty roads with sealed edicts and armed escorts. They raise flags atop wooden towers to signal authority. They establish trial courts to adjudicate disputes between villagers and officials. It's a slow, expensive process. The moral? You can't flip a switch and build a nation. It takes decades of slogging through red tape, bribes, and local pushback. Here's a cliffhanger for you. Despite the pushback, the Taika system held. By the end of the 7th century, provincial capitals dotted Honshu. Ritsuryo codes, legal statutes codified under Tang China's influence, laid the foundation for government. Imperial census rolls grew, state granaries filled with rice, and the emperor, once a figurehead preyed upon by powerful clans, sat on a throne propped up by law. Let's pause and imagine the sensory swirl, the clang of blacksmiths forging official seals, the rustle of silk robes as officials file into courts, the smell of steamed rice in storage granaries reserved for tax payment. Every bureaucratic action reverberates through daily life. Farmers must surrender a portion of their harvest, artisans pay levies, even monks owe loyalty to the state. Religion and governance intertwine as temple lands fall under imperial oversight. But what of the human cost? You don't hear much about the peasants. Census or no census, their world revolves around planting and prayer. New taxes squeeze their livelihoods. Corrupt local officials still demand extra kicks. Yet for some, standardized laws bring order. No more arbitrary clan houses raiding your grain. There's a trade-off between freedom and stability, and history always favors the system with better record keeping. Fast forward a few generations, the Taika reforms have rippled across the archipelago. In the flickering candlelight of court banquets, officials boast of their adoptive Chinese learning. New temples rise in Nara, trade missions set sail for the continent. Japan begins to see itself not as a patchwork of clans, but as a unified realm. The emperor's voice, once muffled by aristocratic squabbles, grows louder across distant provinces. Here's where it gets philosophical. Think about modern government, tax forms, census surveys, zoning laws. They seem mundane, even tedious, but their origin story is dramatic. It involves a palace assassination and a vision of centralized power. Each bureaucratic process traces its lineage back to those first Taika edicts. Every time you fill out a form, you're tapping into a legacy born in blood and ambition. Let me leave you with this final twist. The Taika reforms themselves eventually faded. Court politics morphed, the Ritsuryo system decayed, and by the 11th century, real power rested again in warrior clans. Yet the idea of a centralized state never vanished. It lingered in legal codes, temple inscriptions, and the collective imagination. When the Meiji Restoration resurrected imperial authority in 1868,
It was reaching back to the same blueprint sketched in 645 CE. So next time someone calls bureaucracy boring, remind them of the sword that sparked it all. The Ishii incident and the Taika reforms prove that history's dullest chapters, land surveys and tax registers, can be born from the most dramatic moments. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see the next municipal election with fresh eyes, imagining every ballot as a drop in the river of power that started flowing under a moonlit coup. If you dug this deep dive into palace coups and bureaucratic revolutions, hit that like button. Subscribe for more history stories that go beyond the dusty textbooks. And let me know in the comments which moment in history you'd like to see unraveled next. Until then, keep asking the big questions, because the past is rarely as tidy as it seems.